Hi, my name is Avrum Rosensweig, and welcome to Via Hafta TV, bringing you into the world of empathy. Via Hafta TV is predicated on the idea that every person has a gift and every person has something special deep within them. The idea that if nurtured well, they can bring that to the surface and, in fact, enhance the world. And that's sort of the way I live my life. And, in fact, our guest today lives his life that way as well. We're very excited to have with us John Mastandrea. Mastandrea, I said that correctly? Mm-hmm. It's very interesting. You were telling me before that you're part French, you're part Italian, and most people think you're Greek.
Yes. Because my great-great-grandfather was, but they moved to Italy in the 1800s. So,
yes.
Yeah.
And when we speak about Jews and how they moved through Europe, you know, you'd wake up in one country that the next morning you wake up in the same bed, but it would be another country, right? So things got very confusing. We're excited to have John today on the show because the show is all about Tikkun Olam, which is repairing the world, and you are a reverend. A Christian mystic, you refer yourself as a way of qualifying who you are. And you have sort of ensconced yourself in the whole motif of Tikkun Olam, which is repairing the world. Now, I'm also excited to be with you because I'm the son of an Orthodox rabbi. My father was the rabbi in a city called Kitchener, Ontario, which is an hour away from Toronto. And I was the only son of a Christian rabbi in a city which was called Kitchener, formerly called Little Berlin. So you can imagine the challenges as a little Orthodox kid running around public school with his kippah on, right?
Yes, exactly.
You were born in Toronto.
Yes, I was.
And obviously, at some point in time, you decided that you wanted to do something which many people would qualify as being very special in terms of nurturing the world, taking care of the world, ultimately becoming a reverend. What did your father do for a living?
He was a police officer.
He was, eh?
Yes, for 34 years.
Yeah.
And he saw just about everything in Toronto. He was part of something called the Ethnic Squad at one point, when it was a token. You had one Italian, one Jew, one Jamaican, one Chinese, one Japanese, and now everybody in the police service is ethnic. I mean, there's less of
in Toronto,
yeah,
yes.
Oh yeah, definitely, yeah. Could you qualify that in Toronto?
In Toronto. So what was it like as a little guy when your father would come home, he'd have the badge, did he carry a gun?
It's called the fear of God, okay?
Is that what it was? Was it the fear of God?
He would be, you know the old expression, wait till your father get home? We were terrified when father would come home because he had a police belt. He was also 6'4".
He was a big boy.
Oh yeah, he didn't have to do anything, just have to speak, and we were like, okay, Dad's home. Yeah.
But I've often said that if your father is a pharmacist, your mother's a pharmacist, you're really lucky because you get a new toothbrush every month. You know,
Exactly,
in my case, my father was a rabbi, so he would bring home new books every month. Well, what did your father bring to you?
Actually, when you pick up on the book, he was a bookie. I mean, not in a betting, gambling sort of way. My affinity for reading, we had everything from Greek myths to the Arabian Nights. And I didn't know any better. I just read it because it was on the shelf. And you found out later, well, you just got a classical education by it being on the shelf.
Yes.
And so he had a really deep love for reading. And so it was like a hunger for me when I was growing up. Couldn't read enough and learn enough. And so it pushed me at the envelope of who I was. And, I suppose in terms of culture, growing up in Etobicoke, which was, well, I would say pretty Anglo-Saxon, so to speak, in the part that I grew up in. So being Italian in a public school, we were considered ethnic unique. I mean, anybody who was Italian per se went to the Catholic school. We were for some reason, we were in the public school. Yeah.
What was your dad's name?
Nick.
Nick?
Yeah.
What was your mom like?
Mom, she was...
was she little? I don't know why I see her as being little.
Little, yes. Her name Lorraine, and from a French Catholic background. She had no problem telling you what discipline was all about, setting boundaries and being vocal. Let's put it that way.
Yes.
My father has since passed away. My mother's still living. Yeah.
How old is she now?
She's about 83, but you won't get her to tell her age because she has 3 birth certificates. And the only thing that's constant is she said she was 11 years old when her brother went to war in 1939.
Yes.
So that's the constant. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. My father was a rabbi, as I said before, and
Yes.
quite honestly, he didn't seem, on one hand, he seemed extremely excited about his job. On the other hand, he was very angry about it.
Yes.
I think the excited part was that he was able to take care of people, to help them grow,
Yes.
to make the world a better place, and clearly that was part and parcel of his soul and who he was. I think the angry part of it is when you start taking care of people, or you help start people grow. You realize that the romance goes out of it very quickly. It's a real challenge. Now, you seem to be a happy man, which is good. At what point in your life did you think to yourself, okay, I'm not going to be a cop, right? I love books, but I won't be a librarian. I want to be a reverend.
It was in my third year of chemistry. I was studying chemistry at University of Toronto, and I was very involved in the church. And I remember realizing I couldn't see myself in a laboratory for the rest of my life. And I went to my minister at the time, who said to me, oh, well, have you thought of going in the ministry? And I thought, first of all, I thought he was out of his mind.
Yes.
Because he looked like Moses. To me, I swear, white hair, big beard, boom. And I thought, well, I don't look like that. I can't fit into that bill. But after a lot of reflection, discernment, and I remember going to the official board, and we talked about what that would be. And then as a way to test the waters, I worked first at the Scott Mission in the day camp, which again, half the kids were Caribbean, the other half were Hispanic. Again, outside my comfort zone. I grew up in Etobicoke in a bungalow. This is downtown Toronto, a college in Spadina.
Yeah, college in Spadina.
And I call it colorful neighborhood at the best.
To say the least.
Yeah.
I'm going to break in for a moment because we're going to go to a break.
Okay.
We're here with Reverend John, we're going to call you if that's okay. And he is taking us into the world of empathy on Via Hafta TV. When we come back, I want to talk to you more about the development of your career, because I know that you ended up in Northern Ontario and some of the smaller enclaves, if you will. We share that, and I'm fascinated by what happened there. So stay with us. You're watching Via Hafta TV, taking us into the world of empathy with Reverend John. Welcome back to Via Hafta TV with Reverend John Mastandrea. John, you were telling us before the break that you decided at some point in time during chemistry class that you were going to become a reverend. And that's quite a leap. I met a man once who told me that just for the heck of it, he would become a social worker. The money was fine, the hours were okay. But when you decide on becoming a reverend, okay, I mean, the hours are varied.
The pay is not.
The pay sucks, right?
You don't go into it for the money.
Right.
No.
And then you start to realize that the people that you're taking care of are not necessarily easy people. Now, you ended up in some pretty interesting small towns. Nobody starts off at Queen Street in Toronto.
No, you don't.
Which is where you are now in a very big church. Tell us about some of the smaller places. Let's get into some of the dirt there.
Some of the most amazing, I mean, there I was in it was in 1986, and I asked to be sent as far away from home as I possibly could. Well, who knew for away?
Yes.
I was at 3 planes in our boat ride. I was in Harrington Harbor, and you've probably seen the film Seduction of Dr. Lewis.
Yeah.
That is it. So you arrive, and the houses are on stilts.
Yes.
There's not it's subarctic. The trees are like bonsai, but not because people. This is a 2-foot tall tree because it's so cold. You see icebergs, you see whales. Everyone over 50 you call uncle and aunt. The population is 200-300. The people are from Newfoundland. They came 150 years ago. It's geographically in Quebec, but there's nothing francophone about it. The culture is high-speed Newfie, and everyone is a fisher of sorts, and everyone knows your business. So you walk between A and B to the general store. They had 3 general stores. I never understood why.
Is that Lord Tundra and John? How's the mom's phlebitis?
By Tundra and G.
Yeah.
And spoke so fast, it took me about a month to figure out what people were actually saying.
Can you speak Newfie today?
How you doing, by it? We go down to the wharf. It speaks for rain. It's a bit dirty,
That's good. That's good.
That's almost Irish.
So let me ask you a question.
Yes.
When we think of these places romantically, we see the stilts, we see the gorgeous houses, we see the men by the ocean, and we see the women, cutting the fish and scaling them.
Yes.
But then we get inside of the houses at night or early in the morning. It can be pretty nuts inside there.
It's hard because you had people who either lost their husbands, lost their wives, and this is all they know. And they're living beside their parents, and for some, they talk about going to school away, but they talk about coming back. There's people who fish in the summertime, earn about $150,000 a year, and then live on Pogie the rest of the year. I don't understand the logic of a system like that. This is me. I didn't say anything when I was there, of course. God forbid you upset the apple cart. But if you're making $150,000 a year, isn't that enough? But then why would you get money from the government the rest of the year?
It bugs me too.
Well, I don't get the system.
It bothers me too. But let's get inside the homes a little bit.
Yes.
Growing up in a rabbinical home, I
Yes.
remember the phone calls that would come at 12 o'clock, 1
Yes.
o'clock, 2 o'clock in the
Yes,
morning.
yes.
Rabbi, you need to come over
Now.
now.
There's no never. There's no later.
Now, in
Yes.
fact, I'll give you a dramatic case
Drop
where
it,
this
you do.
a husband of a member was actually choked his wife to death. Then he
Really?
called my father, and I know this is dramatic and extreme.
Yes.
He called my father. He said, "You need to come over now. I just killed my wife." Okay.
And he's phoning your dad?
Yeah, and he phoned my father. Well, you know, you're the reverend,
Yes,
right?
yes.
You have to be there when they're sick. You
Yeah.
have to be there when they're getting married. I was going to say bar mitzvah.
They use
but
the word hatch, match, and dispatch.
is
That's
that what
a
it is?
short term. Yeah.
So tell us one of the interesting memories you have about this small town in Newfoundland where you got that call late at night.
Well, there was a case where someone had died, and so immediately you're called. You scuffle yourself together, and they want to. First of all, there's the prayers that go with that. There's the grieving that go with that, and immediately all the neighbors come over, and so you're walking with them one on one. It's you and them.
Yes.
And they just want to know that they're going to a better place.
Yes.
That's all they want to know. There's not the theology of death 101. There's not, we will now go through the third stage of grief. I mean, no. I mean, this is real. It's hard. And because it's interesting in a community like that, because there is such a tremendous support, not unlike in the city. I mean, immediately everyone comes with a dish of something. Here you got a phone and book, send a text and send a courier to practically make an appointment. They don't hesitate. They show up at the door, and they're just there with you. They're sitting, and they're having tea and coffee and cookies or whatever they have. And there's just tremendous communal grief. It's tribal grief. It's real. And you're part of that. You're leading the way. And you start planning the funeral. What is it going to look like? And in that place, I remember what amazed me, unlike here, there's no funeral director.
Yeah.
You're almost the funeral director. It's like an Irish wake. Uncle Fred or Aunt Beth is on the table,
Yeah.
and they're having a party. I mean, that's it.
Have you been in an Irish wake?
Yes.
Did you drink?
Yes, of course.
Isn't it
Yeah.
bizarre to see the body sitting there with a glass of beer
Exactly.
in their hand?
But you know what? It works.
It works.
It works. And it's part of that culture and part of the sense of grief is on the table. It's not buried away. And I think that's important.
I wish we Jews did more of that.
But
A little bit of Johnny Walker
sitting
next to
Shiva.
Moishi.
But sitting Shiva, I mean, there's
Shiva's
something-
good too.
it's that
No, Shiva's
but
good
it's
too.
communal grief, right?
It's
not
communal grief.
It's
Let me ask you, when they ask you, please, Reverend, tell us, that we're going
Yes,
to. Did you always tell them they're going to heaven?
I would, but I wouldn't say heaven is the bright pearly gates up there. Heaven is that place that we're all going to go to.
So you would say yes, you're going.
Yes, yes.
What if there were rotten, scoundrels?
I didn't have anybody like that.
Good, thank God.
But I wouldn't have said they're going to hell.
You can imagine that, eh?
I-
You'll be
I-
going to hell.
I wouldn't. I would never tell someone. I tell a family, certainly their relatives.
You think people do go to hell?
What I think of is hell is when you turn yourself, and hell's now, it's not later on.
Yes.
Okay, people, when they turn their back on what's good, or, what's a good example? If someone is beating their children,
Yeah.
if someone rapes a woman, if someone is abusing their child, physically, sexually abusing their child, that is hell. And it's here and now. It's not about later on.
Okay.
Right.
We're here with Reverend John, a lovely man who has committed himself to the betterment of the world. We're watching via Hafta TV. The whole idea is to bring people into the world of empathy. When I was growing up, if somebody was gay, well, it didn't sit very well with my dad. Homophobia was pretty popular. You were a gay reverend. Wow.
Yes.
Again, quite a leap. We'll talk about that when we come back. Stay with us via Hafta TV.
Yeah, good cliffhanger there, don't you?
Welcome back to Via Hafta TV. I'm Avrum Rosensweig. My guest is Reverend John. You're a doctor?
Yes.
What's your PhD in?
It's a doctorate of ministry. It's focusing on theology, biography, a sense of art and spirituality, how it touches us to be active in our faith.
Do you think you're intelligent? You think you're a smart man?
I would say yes. I wouldn't say intelligent. I know enough to ask the questions. I know enough that the more I learn, the more I would realize, I'll quote Yentl, the less I know. Okay.
Yeah. Do you have a
Yeah.
good self-image?
Very much so.
Now, did that come from you? Or did it come from your upbringing, or?
I'm a combination of both. People call me Mary Poppins from when I was little, and I wake up exploding with exuberance in the morning, and it carries me through the day. I'm going to have my down moments, certainly, but for the most part, no, I would say very
Are
positive.
you a gentleman?
Pretty well. I wouldn't say, I mean, I have my moments where I get aggressive, but I wouldn't say, if I was to choose between making peace in the world or taking up a sword, I would choose making peace.
Have you ever been in a physical fight?
Oh yeah, when I was 12, that was my you know the Hollywood moment
Yes.
where you move from being the one who is being chastised
Yes.
to you stand up against, well, not so much the bully, but just you have a fist fight or two, and then people don't bother you anymore. It was classic. You could have. It was like someone staged it.
Yes.
And it happened, and it was in the playground, so everyone saw it happen. So my rite of passage, my manhood ceremony in the middle of the playground.
You know, the problem with being brought up in an empathetic home, like an acutely empathetic home as I was,
Yes.
is that I was in a fight also in the playground, and
Right.
I let the kid knock me down.
Really?
So that
Yeah.
he shouldn't be embarrassed in front of his friends.
Right.
And I don't say that for accolades
Yes,
or for whatever,
yeah.
but I do remember that fighting someone, it's a classic thing, you know,
Yeah.
Jacob in the Torah, when his brother
Yes.
Esau was coming,
Yes.
somebody said something along the lines of he was afraid and he was frightened or what have you. He was afraid because he might have to kill, and he was
Yes.
frightened because he might be killed. It's an interesting piece. As a reverend, you must be so acutely empathetic to other people's needs that God forbid you should hurt somebody, right?
I would never hurt someone.
When you hurt someone, let's say in other ways, if you
Even emotionally.
does it stay with you for a long time?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so there's a sense of confronting the argument or confronting the event again. If I feel someone has informed me either through an email or a phone call that they felt very much hurt by what I said, I will go not overboard, but address that immediately. I won't let it linger or say, well, they don't know what they're talking about. If I can't, I mean, there's moments where someone doesn't want to come near you, and they basically put an iron door of indifference. And even if you attempt to come near them, they'll basically tell you where to go or take a hike. And so there's a point where you got to let it go, right?
You're a reverend. Father was a cop.
Yes.
Your church is in Toronto on Queen Street.
Yes.
Pretty multicultural area, somewhat of a tough area. You're gay.
Yes.
How does it all fit? Do they all come together?
Oh, well, where I am, yeah, because it's a church that said yes to being, they use the word affirming. So regardless of our orientation, you can celebrate not only lay people, but ordained gay ministers. I'm also a chaplain at the police service, and I'm the first out gay chaplain. And so I guess for them, that was a direction they wanted to move in as well, because they've affirmed that on the police force as well.
Yeah.
In the downtown of Toronto, and I would say not just because you have the gay lesbian village right nearby, just by virtue of who enters the door. I mean, straight people are finding, because of our stance on gay lesbian issues, are feeling affirmed in who they are. If someone comes who's divorced or questions who God is, they can come to us and ask the deeper questions and don't feel we're going to throw doctrine or dogma at them in a bucket and say, here, chew on this, this is it, this is your brick, now go take the brick home and build your dogma. No, take apart the dogma.
Yes.
What was the core belief?
So, the Bible, the first commandment in the Bible is you should be fruitful and multiply, right?
Yes.
When you're hugging your lover, Bill,
Yes.
as a Republican, I understand.
Well, he probably wouldn't call himself that now, but
Yes.
yeah, he came from a family of that, yeah.
When you're hugging him, when you're cuddling with one
Yes.
another, when you're kissing,
Yes.
do you feel very, very Christian?
I feel very Christian, very spiritual, very affirmed.
Yes.
Yes.
No questions your mind.
No,
Even though the first commandment is thou shalt be fruitful and multiply.
very much so.
Yes.
Yes.
How do you bring that all together?
Well, I first dealt with that, I guess, when I was 17. I had my first lover, and I was attending a Pentecostal church. And I used the you hear me quote Yentl a lot, well, God will understand, but the neighbors won't. I mean, but
Don't be too loud.
In the core of my being, I knew that what I was doing was not wrong. Yes. Even though I was hearing homophobic sermons from the Pentecostal minister, in the core of whom I am. And I remember writing a paper when I was in my early 20s on the very issue, and dealt with the whole, David and Jonathan. I mean, my love for you is greater than love for women. Or the whole Sodom and Gomorrah piece that basically says, okay, you can't have sex with angels, but it's okay to rape my daughters. I mean, those bits. Or the part that talks about homosexuality being a sin, but in the same track, the whole kosher eating laws that certainly Christians don't practice anymore. But, learning and reading a lot, realizing that masturbation is right up there with homosexuality, or even sex that doesn't produce children. Well, clearly there's a sense of, in the culture at the time, it had more to do with spilling the seed on the land and the high child mortality than a sense of whether homosexuality was perfectly fine. We learned in the temple that there were male and female prostitutes. Well, if it was okay to earn a living off male and female prostitutes, clearly people had reconciled homosexuality, so to speak.
So interesting. We have to go to a break, but my father was very conservative, small C conservative, an Orthodox rabbi. And so often when I hear these stories and you tell about your history and your narrative, he would just cringe. We'll come back because it's so interesting where we come from and how we change over time. Because I'm perfectly comfortable with your life and I embrace what you're doing. You're watching V'ahavta TV. We're talking to Reverend John, Dr. Reverend John. And when we come back, we're going to delve into the world of multi-faith. The world is in a little bit of a kerfuffle when it comes to Christian, Jews, and Muslims particularly.
Oh, big time.
But that's a world that you're touching, and I want to hear more about that. Stay with us, V'ahavta Television. Welcome back to V'ahavta TV, bringing you into the world of empathy with Reverend John Mastandrea. Thank you again for joining us, John. A little bit about V'ahavta, I know you know something about it, is that we were established 15 years ago. And the idea behind V'ahavta was really predicated on encouraging all Jews and all peoples to play a role in Tikkun Olam, which is repairing the world, something that you're very familiar with. It bothered me greatly when I was younger that the Jewish people had been saying for so many decades following the Holocaust, never again. But yet when something like Rwanda occurred in the war in the Balkans, of course there were Jews who were at the forefront as there were Christians and otherwise, but predominantly our community was very quiet. And that was very, very painful for me and seemed like a blatant contradiction, what we were saying versus how we were acting. So I launched V'ahavta with some friends, and thank God today we still exist. And I think we're quite the force, and we've made a lot of changes both locally and internationally. Locally, we take volunteers out into the street on our vans to help the homeless. We just interviewed a fellow, unfortunately, a homeless fellow who's dying, and he coined the phrase for us, yids for skids.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I like that.
Wow.
It's a badge of honor, I
think.
Yes. We worked in Sri Lanka, we've worked in Honduras, El Salvador. Of course, we've worked in Israel, Zimbabwe, Guyana, the rainforest of Guyana, and many other countries, taking Jews and non-Jews to these places to roll up their sleeves, to get their hands dirty. The Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, said to help your brother means to get your nails dirty, and that's really what we encourage. Now, you grew up in Etobicoke, which is a part of Toronto, and it's eastern Toronto, or western Toronto. Western Toronto. And you were saying that you grew up in a very particular type of book, particular type of understanding of the Jewish people in the world. And then that evolved. Tell us a little bit about this, the writings that really encourage you to be who you are today.
Well, it was first seeing the miniseries Holocaust that was a real eye-opener for me, because we, in a neighborhood where as far as I knew, we didn't have any Jewish people living in the neighborhood, or if we did, no one proclaimed that they were Jewish, but that whole becoming aware of the pain of the world. But then in high school, part of the lexicon of reading included B'chaim Patak, The Chosen, The Promise, and I remember reading My Name is Asher Lev, and that just opened the whole, I couldn't get enough of that story, and hearing about the Reform movement and the Hasidic movement and the Kabbalistic understanding of
what resonated with you in the book The Promise?
It was a sense of how Jewish people engaged in polemic. It was about questions, not about answers. And the heated debate. And I thought, I like that. I mean, this is how it needs to be. Not about, again, finding the solutions, but about what does this mean, and chewing on the text, but chewing on life, and what did life mean? And the fact that there were these two friends who were, one was Reformed and one was Hasidic, coming from polarized understandings of society, and getting into heated debate about what their lives meant, and what their roles were. And even at the time, this is about Zionism. One camp saying, yes, we need to have an Israeli state. The other one saying, no. Right. Our community saying, no, we can't do this. But then coming to a sense of resolution of what that would mean.
Coming from the other side of the fence, if you will, me being Jewish, you know.
Yes.
Did you see anti-Semitism? Did you hear it? Was it in your house at all? Was it in your neighborhood?
If it was very subtle.
Yeah.
I remember when we were reading that particular book, I'd never heard anyone say, well, that's the book about Jewish culture. And in hindsight, I think the first time I heard the term anti-Semitism, and it was a slap in my face, because someone referred to me as being anti-Semitic, and I struggled with this, because I remember writing a play, and it was called Spirit on the Roof. It was a takeoff on Fiddler on the Roof for actually Christmas time, and the premise of the play was the character Tevye,
yes,
same name, was helping the Christians understand about Christmas, because they didn't know how it worked.
Very good.
And he says, well, this is how it works. Okay.
This is a play you wrote?
Yes, I wrote it. And someone said at the time, I didn't understand what they meant by being even anti-Semitic, because I had never encountered that. And I talked later with them, and I said, well, my intention was never I would be horrified to think I would have done something that would be perceived as anti-Semitic. And I think it's because they had a Jewish friend who was offended by what I had done. And I said, well, please forgive me. Because again, I felt absolutely horrified that possibly something that I created would have done that. Especially, however, having seen the miniseries Holocaust a few years over, and reading the different books by Chaim Potok.
You know, it's interesting. Years ago, I remember listening to a speaker who said, we all have certain biases.
Yes.
There are probably individuals or peoples or entities out there that we may not like.
Yes.
I have to be honest with you. I grew up not liking Germans.
Yes.
I once bought a little eraser made in Germany. My mother took me by the hand, schlepped me back to the store. She said, you're returning that. Growing up in an Orthodox environment, there was not taught a great love for Muslims.
Yes.
It just wasn't.
Okay.
I've had to break through that, and sometimes I still catch myself, and I have to remind myself we're all creations of God. Are there peoples, are there entities that you find deep inside of yourself you just don't have a strong taste for, and you have to remind yourself that's just not a good Christian thing to do?
It's interesting. Growing up, you probably know what manja cake is.
I know manja cake.
Okay,
yeah.
manja cake. Okay. And
that's what Italians call white guys.
Everybody else, well, but mostly
everybody else.
English Canadian. And part of it was, I guess, because people were calling me a wop.
Yeah.
When I was in middle school, before I even understand what that was. And so suddenly you know you're not them.
Right.
Right? Or someone called me after I came back from, what was it? Oh, summer holiday. They called me a Paki, when that horrible expression was very popular in the 70s. So basically anybody who looked Middle Eastern was lumped with being Pakistani. You could be Afghanistan, you could have been from India for that matter. But with a tan, I guess I looked very Middle Eastern. Mm-hmm. And he referred me to that. So I would say, growing up, it would be mostly Anglo-Saxon, not intentionally, just because they referred to me, not all, but as not part of their clan or their tribe. You
were the other.
Yeah, and first of all, I didn't get that. But then later on, when I was immersed not far from here, on Dufferin in Steep Rock Road, I worked for 2 summers at John Vince Foods, and suddenly it was like being in the Italian Sea.
Yeah, right.
And which was quite remarkable. All of a sudden, all these affinities, John Guzanzio, Vincenzo Pula, and you're surrounded by Italian 101. It was quite remarkable.
My aunt and I, God bless her soul, she died at 94 last year. We used to go into John Vince Food and steal the candies all the time.
Did you remember the chocolate machine?
Oh, yeah, it was fantastic.
I worked in the chocolate machine
really,
2
I probably
summers.
used to steal from you. I apologize.
There you go.
We are speaking with Reverend John, a lovely man who has committed himself to Tikkun Olam, to repairing the world. When we come back, we are actually going to delve into the world of multiculturalism and multi-faith, something that you're very much involved with. So stay with us. You're watching via Hafta TV, and we're taking you into the world of empathy. Welcome back to Via Havta TV. I'm Avrum Rosensweig. I'm with Reverend John. If you'd like more information, by the way, about Via Havta, please go to our website at www.viahavta.org. That's VEAHAVTA. Our headquarters are here in Toronto, and we can be reached at 416-964-7698. When my father passed away in Kitchener in 1989, he was 61 years old. Interesting, I'm 51, so the closer I get to the age of my father's demise, the more I consider my own. Are you like that as well?
Not yet, because my father was 80 something. I'm 40,
How old are you now?
48.
So you're still a kid. When's your birthday?
August 7th, 63.
Okay,
Yeah.
April 27th, 1960.
There you go.
Nice to meet you. Yes, and at his shloshim, which is the 30 days after his death, it was at the synagogue in Kitchener, Beth Jacobs Synagogue. Once again, that's 1 hour from Toronto. There were about 1,000 people there.
Oh my.
Yes,
Okay.
and they weren't all Jewish. I saw many people there with turbans. I saw many individuals from the Middle East, South Americans, Italians, individuals from all backgrounds. My father, God bless his soul, used to go visit the prisons every weekend, and he would come back and tell me stories about the inmates whom he had met with. Again, many of whom were not Jewish. There was a fellow in Toronto. His name was Nicky Furlano. You remember Nicky Furlano, the boxer? He went to jail for a while. And my father would come back and tell stories about visiting with him. So although he was a small C conservative man, an Orthodox individual, he used to wear the black suits all the time and a hat. He didn't have side curls, but he was very religious. He had a sense of the world. He understood that a Jew could not be insular because it didn't work for us and it didn't work for the world. So as I got older, when I started Via Havta, it made a lot of sense for us to work with the Native community. It made a lot of sense for us to be part of multi-faith committees with Muslim, Christians, again, natives on them, people of all backgrounds, Zoroastrians, and so on. That approach to life has added an awful lot, it added to my life, enhanced my soul, and really given me a stronger sense of what it means to be Jewish and what it means to be part of this world. You are involved in many multi-faith committees and multi-faith activities. What brought you to that?
Since from day one, getting involved certainly in the Toronto context, but definitely it was about 10 years ago, I was invited to be part of the 20th anniversary of the Peace Garden.
Yes.
And that was a very much multi-faith, interfaith committee, and got the great experience of hearing the story about Hiroshima. And that's one of those groundbreaking events in the sense of it levels everyone. It touched everyone. It didn't matter what creed, culture. The impact is universal.
Level being the key word there.
Yes, and yeah, literally. And it was the sense of celebration of the 20th anniversary. There was such an energy after. We continued on with the Toronto Area Interfaith Council. And as a result of that, we've had, I guess for the last 5 years, we had breakfast with the mayor, though last year the mayor didn't come. And the year before, we had 4 or 5 candidates, mayoral candidates. But there's been a sense of about 150, 200 people attend. And last year, what we did, we heard of a youth speak on his transformational experience. One of the areas I'm involved with is Camp Scugog. And for all the people who are part of the Interfaith Council, it's about touching the youth. Because only when people come into that context, that's how we're going to transform the world, not just by bringing the adults on board, but it's about the next generation, how they see each other, perceive each other. And just this fall, 60 of us, 20 Jewish people, 20 Muslim, 20 Christians, went to Israel. And we went to all the sacred spots for each tradition.
Yes.
The first time I've ever been able to go on a pilgrimage and see the Holy Land through the eyes of other. Suddenly the Sabbath had meaning. I'd been there on a Friday before, but it was, the tour guide would say, well, they're having the Sabbath. No, now it's we're having the Sabbath, and we're part of it. We're lighting candles, and we're saying Shabbat Shalom. And then having Muslim people. Going to Hebron, the tomb of Abraham and Sarah, it was powerful. Now, mind you, because of what happened in the 90s, when I guess Israeli men opened fire, the Jewish and Christian group could go this way, and the Muslim and Christian group had to go the other way. But the anomaly is here we are praying, but we're on the other side of the screen, but there's the tomb of Abraham and Sarah. but in an area that was built again by King Herod,
Right.
but very powerful. And then going to Jenin and going, and one of the most powerful moments of the many was being at the Western Wall on Sabbath. And Rabbi Baruch Friedman Cole, who was ready to...
Who's a rabbi in Toronto, at
Yes,
Bethsaida Synagogue, yes.
Women on one side, men on the other, had his prayer book open. And here he's ready to have a traditional little cluster. He looks down, he looks up, closes his book, says, we're joining the group.
Very nice.
And here's the goy thinking, we're going to be on the edge of this circle, and there's circles and circles and circles. They pull you in, and who would have thought an hour and a half singing in Hebrew, dancing, and there's Israeli soldiers side by side with you. It was the most powerful moment and it wasn't about a great plan or a prelude. It was about just do it and engage in it and be part of it.
John, when we come back,
Yes.
I want you to tell us about the Muslim that we know nothing about.
Yes.
Because there's certainly a lot of stereotypes out there.
Yes.
But you know many
Yes.
Muslims firsthand.
Yes.
So stay with us. You're watching Via Hafta TV, and we're taking you into the world of empathy
Yes.
with Dr. Reverend John. I mean, I know what it's like to be a Jew in a non-Jewish environment, and it can be uncomfortable. I've experienced anti-Semitism. Nowadays, when I watch television and I hear interviews with a Muslim man or a Muslim woman, and something just happens in the world which is somewhat perilous, having to do with Muslim communities, very often he or she will say it's dangerous to be a Muslim in the West, and my heart goes out to them, because I know what that feels like. And when I was a kid in Kitchener, where they celebrate Oktoberfest, and this is without exaggeration, we kind of stayed inside. And, you know, whether we should have or not, it was a little bit of a scary time for us. I don't know if you've experienced such things, but you do work very closely with Muslim leadership, particularly. Tell us about the Muslim world. What don't we know? Who don't we know?
Well, not far from here, and you're probably on Supertest Road,
Which is northern Toronto.
Yes.
Yes.
Is IDI, Intercultural Diverse Institute, which for the most part they're Turkish Muslims.
Right.
And the tradition of Rumi, which is very much about peace. And one of the things they do, they give out free in the month of February Noah's pudding. And the idea is dialogue between Jewish, Christian, Muslim people. They just had their dinner January the 12th. Interfaith, every major faith leader, politician is invited to this dinner. And they honor this year Matt Galloway, and you can't get more intercultural than Matt, and I was surprised how tiny he is. He's this little guy. Robert Fisher was the MC. But their thrust is to bring people to Turkey and to expose them on sort of this culture of the Turkish people, but also the Muslim culture. You're invited into Muslim homes to experience the breaking the fast. You're invited to be part of different dialogues and discussions, but it's cracking open the stereotype. Now, it's interesting because parallel to that is the Ismaili Muslims. Zul Qasim, he's also part of the Interfaith. And again, now some Muslims would say they're not really Muslims. And, you know, it's a bit like some Christians would call the United Church of Canada not really Christian because they're so liberal. But they identify as Ismaili Muslim.
Yes.
And I think what they're doing is making a difference in the world. They really care. And the Turkish Muslims are a machine that has surgical precision for peace, just like the Ismaili Muslims are a machine, and they're well organized, surgical precision for peace.
Do you think their voice is getting louder?
Oh, very much.
Because
so.
again, when we
Yes.
grew up, our belief was a vocal Muslim is a dead Muslim.
Yes. But when you read Karen Armstrong's book, Battle for God, and you've probably done that, you have, okay, one of the big misnomers for Western people is the three Muslim empires. The Ottoman, which is the very conservative, then the Safavid, and the Mughal. Now, one of the terms she uses is ijtihad, which is where you're meant to question. Well, the Ottomans were called not to question because, again, they retrenched. They were worried about what happened when the Mughals came and wiped them almost out. But the idea of a thinking, questioning Muslim is something that, for the most part, the West isn't aware of. But yet, Muslim people all around are thinking and questioning. What we tend to see, unfortunately, in the media is the extreme where you have this alliance to a faith tradition that didn't even exist in the 12th century.
Right.
But unfortunately, just like every faith tradition did this, Christian, Muslim, Jewish, Hindu, Buddhist, everybody went through their own fundamentalist period and still does.
And still does.
But unfortunately, sometimes what's presented in the media is the fundamentalist perspective.
What are you reading nowadays?
Oh, I always have about 10 books on the go. One is the third book by Dan Neiman. That's one of them. I'm reading Kugel's book. It's called In the Valley of the Shadow, which deals with the foundation of religious belief. All people, everywhere, had religious belief and need to have a religious belief first, and not this religiosity with doctrine, but and I'm not sure if you know him.
I don't know. No.
CBC Ideas is a wealth of resource for such programs or even authors, but his idea is that he found out news that he had cancer. When you're faced with that, with the Grim Reaper coming, you turn to something, whoever your higher power is, regardless of your faith tradition, and you don't try to go it on your own, or if you do, you're not physically dead, but you're spiritually left out of the loop. And so you go back to that sense, because the chemo, you can't do that all on your own.
Correct.
And you need that.
You ever been an atheist?
Never. I've been through periods. I was purchasing or taking books of the library on Wiccan and witchcraft and all that stuff, but there's always been something spiritual connected with me and part of me.
We have about 2 minutes left, and I would like very much to hear from you, and for our listeners, our viewers, to hear from you about the whole concept of the development of the self and how one can bring their own special gifts to the fore to make this world a better place. You and I both work with the homeless, and we know that you can see lots of gifts in the street, people living under bridges, in valleys. What do you preach to your congregants, the people you're with, about making this world better?
Give back. Abraham, the passage in Genesis, you are blessed to be a blessing. That isn't just about the blessing coming and stopping with us. We have a duty and a call to give back. Doesn't have to be a lot, but just give back. Pick a charity, pick a cause, engage it, embrace it, and be part of it. Because when we don't give, it's interesting, Hindus figured this out millennia ago.
Yes.
It's called the karmic cycle. And if you don't participate in it, don't wonder why you're having a hard life.
Right.
Because so many people, and we see it every time, people wonder why their life is so hard, why their life doesn't have meaning, because they're not giving back at some corner. And everyone I've met, and the premise of my doctoral thesis was about how people in the past gave back, how we're called to give back.
Very good.
But some people, unfortunately, miss the moment, and it becomes more about their own sense of entitlement and not about how they can give back.
Yet the interesting thing is it's really not for us to say what a person accomplishes in their lifetime. You and I have both seen, gasoline station attendants who have passed away, and we think, well, what have they done with their life? Who knows? Who knows? They may be one of the 36 righteous, right?
Well, giving back isn't about the monumental. It's about what you do day to day.
Correct.
And I agree with you.
Reverend John, I want to thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Absolute pleasure to speak to you, by the way.
A pleasure.
You're a very soft-spoken, lovely man. You have a beautiful spirit. So thank you for joining us here at Via Hofta TV. And we want to thank you for watching as well. Join us next week when we have someone perhaps not as equally as compelling. We say that every week. But a great guest. And bring your own gift to the fore and do what you can to make this world a better place, because it's got lots of potential. My name is Avrum Rosensweig. The show is called Via Hofta TV. And we were taking you into the world of empathy with Reverend John. Thank you again.
Thank you.